In this episode, we're going to cover 6/4 resolutions, which means the fifth is the lowest note of the fully diminished seventh chord. And if you haven't seen the previous episodes, I suggest going back and doing so, because I'm going to do a lot of things in here that may not make sense, because I may use them in these later episodes. And also, if you don't know how to use chromatic harmony in key, don't bother with this video. I'm just being honest, don't bother watching it. And I do offhand have a course right here that you can has nearly 150 examples royalty free to use of in-key chromatic harmony, ranging from augmented chords and their secondary function to half diminished to full diminished to dominant chords, as well as augmented sixth and Neapolitan sixth. So let's get started. Let's first talk about 6/4. Okay, that's root position of a chord. Now when you put the fifth in the bass, it does not sound complete. And this is the reason, one of the reasons chromatic composers use this is because of that very fact. You notice it doesn't sound complete? Now it sounds complete. So 6/4 chords want to also go somewhere. However, we're going to talk about a fully diminished seventh chord resolving into a 6/4 chord. This is very common. Usually we think of it as a leading tone in the previous episodes. This is now changing. It's no longer a leading tone. In other words, it's not going to resolve to a triad up a half step. It's going to resolve to a chord with the fifth in the bass, which is super common in late Romantic era chromatic harmony. And I'm going to show you where this originates. And the reason you'd want to resolve into a 6/4 chord is because that also wants to go somewhere, just like a diminished chord does, or a dominant. So let's just take C major for a second. Let me play just all 6/4 chords in a row. It produces a very disjunct harmonic sequence, and this is something I usually encourage students to avoid, is more than one 6/4 chord in a row when it comes to in-key music. So if I do the 6/4 position here, instead of doing that, I would encourage not to jump to another 6/4. So in-key basic triadic progressions, I usually encourage not following a 6/4 up with another 6/4. Because, as you heard, it sounds very disjunct when I do that. So a bunch of 6/4s in a row when you're trying to write in-key progressions is not going to sound very good. Just choosing these chords randomly, you hear it just doesn't sound very nice or lovely at all, nor complete or seem like it has any direction. So I'd usually encourage like any kind of 6/4 to actually be followed up by some kind of move that's not 6/4. So there's a little tip with in-key music, but for our purposes in chromatic modulation, we're going to go ahead and produce a lot more 6/4 chords. Right here. Another one. Six/4. Why are we doing this? Because it continuously wants to yearn to go somewhere. So on that little improv, I did two 6/4s, the E 6/4, created a half diminished, but I resolved that to another 6/4. Thus it sounds incomplete all the time, and it has that yearn sound. I did in this case use one half diminished, which we're not going to talk about in this one. We're going to concentrate on the fully diminished seventh chord. So in the key, like in the key of C, there's what you call the fully diminished seventh of 5. It will resolve to 5, but it also can resolve to the one chord in the 6/4 position, meaning the fifth as the lowest note. This is very common. So this is where that move originates, is going from that diminished to the 6/4 in key. So it's a very common in-key move with in-key chromatic harmony. Now here's the thing about chromatic modulation and in-key chromatic harmony. You usually want to approach these kind of things by step. They sound so much smoother, and they'll actually help you create smoother bass lines and chord connections. You really want to avoid a lot of jumping from like this, or let me see, it won't produce nearly as smooth of a transition as that will, as approaching by step. And this is going to become particularly true in chromatic modulation. Now keep this in mind, and I created a modulation that goes from E flat to A minor, which is a tritone away, so it's very distant, but it happens very rapidly. So the B diminished seventh is going to resolve to this F in the 6-4 position with the fifth in the bass. The B diminished would usually go to the 6th chord, but we go to the F, and we're going to treat the F as neutral as the 6th chord of A minor, and so we're almost already there. So here's the modulation. See how it works out fine? It's a different resolution for a diminished chord. Now I use the dominant 9, flat 9, like that. Or we could use a Picardy third, like that, giving you more options. Because if we treat this as a Picardy third, it gives us a different set of ways we could keep modulating, giving us and you could actually treat that A major as your new tonal center instead of A minor. Treat chords in a very neutral fashion. So now let's just go the opposite direction, A minor to E flat. And it's actually very straightforward and simple to do this with this trick too. Fully diminished seventh of the flat 7 chord in A minor, instead resolving to the flat 3, which is our pivot chord, treating it neutral, allowing us to escape to E flat very quickly. Notice that when setting these things up too, that whenever you have a common tone like this, take advantage of it. It helps connect the dots. Remember this also, there's other ways to do the same exact sequence from like A minor to E flat. I could do something like this. And I'm trying to keep stuff in stepwise motion like I mentioned before, not as much disjunct motion. And keep that almost a continuous walking kind of patterns. This really helps with your chromatic modulation, believe it or not, as opposed to the large skips and jumps. And that's as far as we're going to take this. Learn one move at a time. That's the way I say, break everything down to simple, tiny moves. Secondary dominance can also resolve to 6/4 chords. So this is something we're going to cover later. And secondary functioning, like half diminished, which I will cover in another video. The whole point is to learn one small move at a time and really focus on it. Try every possible combination. Try a different modulation than what I wrote out here. You literally want to break things down into small chunks, and this is where I differ. I'm not going to show you the whole Tristan analysis, for instance, from start to finish, because it's actually overwhelming for people. Where you want to start is breaking things down into teeny tiny chunk moves, memorizing them, and then noticing where they reoccur in music. And they recur quite a lot once you start noticing these things in chromatic modulation.